It doesn't take a baby long to realize the effectiveness of the concentration of its energies. Let that baby find itself in uncomfortable circumstances, and it soon comes to realize that the greater the concentration of its energies behind its plaintive cry, the greater, the more effective will be the response to its predicament. The sooner relief will come to its uncomfortable situation. Let that lesson of yesteryear not be lost upon you and upon me this morning. Today we sit here with ambitious aims. We have chosen these ambitious aims because we feel that they are valuable and worthwhile. We believe that they are achievable, and we hope that through these ambitious aims we may be able to achieve happiness and lasting satisfaction. Others have sat here before us at the dawn of a new school year. Likewise, they had ambitious aims. Many of those succeeded. Some failed to achieve the ambitious aims that they had set out for themselves. It is well that we forget not the folly of dispersing our efforts upon those ambitious aims that are not that valuable nor that worthwhile, but instead to realize the effectiveness of the concentration of our energies upon those ambitious aims that are most calculated and guaranteed to bring us lasting happiness and satisfaction. The importance of the concentrating of our energy upon these aims has been reminded to us in the scientific world. In the 1950s, simultaneously, though independently, American and Soviet researchers discovered the laser phenomena. Laser light is the most powerful in the world. Ordinary light, such as we have here in our light bulbs, or that which comes from the sun, is known as diffuse light. As it travels, it is dissipated. Ordinary light consists of electromagnetic waves oscillating at a variety of frequencies over the electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves to X-rays. On the other hand, laser light is coherent light. That is, laser light consists of electromagnetic waves oscillating on only one frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum. Therefore, it is easier and more effective to be able to aim it. Because of this quality of laser light, it has been a real benefit to mankind, from the ability to improve delicate eye surgery to cutting heavy pieces of steel or concrete with this laser beam. One of the most amazing to me is the satellite that they put in orbit some 300 miles above the Earth, and through laser beam they have been able to send back to this Earth photographs taken from that height of trucks going along the road here on Earth with such a high resolution that each driver of the vehicles are readily and accurately identified. It is well, then, that we consider seriously those aims upon which we desire to concentrate our energy for the greatest effectiveness. But it's not just our idea to consider these ambitious aims. We find that in Proverbs chapter 4, the suggestion there is made that we consider our ambitious aims very carefully. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 26, "Take heed to the path of your feet." Here the Bible writer is encouraging us to consider the way that we're going to go. He encourages us to consider our ambitious aims, as it were. The writer here has chosen from his language one of the strongest tenses that he could use to try to get this message across. It's as if he were saying, I suggest that you strongly, seriously and critically consider your ambitious aims, the path of your feet. And what will be the result? He goes on to say, then all your ways will be sure. Oh, what a blessing to have sure ways. We've seen individuals who don't know exactly what they're going to do in life, nor which way they are to go, and so they oscillate from one thing to the other. Sometimes students coming into college don't know what they want to major in, and so from one quarter to another they're switching from one discipline to another. All that time and energies and efforts being wasted. And then the Bible writer adds for us in final counsel, do not swerve to the left or to the right. Concentrate your energies upon the path that you have chosen, and then you will realize the greatest effectiveness. Where am I to find these ambitious aims that are most calculated to bring me lasting satisfaction and happiness? Oh, I'm grateful that we can turn to God's Word, and there we can find, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the ambitious aims that I may incorporate into my experience. For there I find an ambitious aim for my life, an ambitious aim for my conduct, and an ambitious aim for my work. I think of that young student from Stanford University on a Friday. He stood in the office before Mr. Louis Janine. He too wanted to become a mining engineer, and he felt there was no better place to perfect his desire than there in the office of that outstanding mining engineer. As Mr. Janine looked at him, he said, I'm sorry, we have no place in the office at this time. The only thing I'm in need of is a stenographer. Oh, that will be fine, said the young man. After a few days, on Tuesday, I will return and ready for the job. On Tuesday, he again stood before Mr. Janine. Mr. Janine, with a question in his voice, asked, why was it that you couldn't start work immediately? You wanted a few days before you came back. You see, I had to go out and rent a typewriter, the young man explained, and learn how to use it. A smile broke across the lips of Mr. Janine as he replied, I think you will do. And by the way, young man, what is your name? Herbert Hoover, sir, replied the young man. An ambitious aim for my life. We find that when we begin to follow the counsel that we've read here in Proverbs, to begin to strongly, seriously, and critically examine our ambitious aims, we immediately face a question, an important question, a necessary one that we must answer. What for is all this effort? As I look back to the past and see the mountains of difficulty that I have struggled up, I meet that question, what for is all this effort? As I look back and see those dreary deserts of despair that I dragged across, again I'm faced with that important question, what for is all this effort? As I look forward to the future and see the masses of humanity around me, that they too desire satisfaction and happiness and have failed to find it, I meet that question, what for all this effort? As I look about me and see the way, the terrible mess, the chaos that the politics of this world have gotten this world into, I face that question. What for all this effort? I saw some individuals who answered that question. It was in Hamburg, Germany. There in downtown Hamburg, near the large department store C&A, is a plaza surfaced with concrete. I saw those individuals whiling away their hours and their days sitting on the concrete in the plaza, chalk in hand, drawing chalk caricatures on the concrete. You see, they had met that question as they examined their ambitions seriously, strongly, and critically. They had met that question, what for all this effort? And they said, it's not worth it. And so as the wind blew, that's the way that they would go. What for all this effort? I think of those individuals who feel, oh, if only they can be accepted by other people. Yes, then the effort will have been worth it. Sociologists have coined the term social mobility. This describes the movements of an individual within the system of social stratification of their society. Those individuals who make movements and actions in order to try to be accepted by those individuals that are in their same social class, these movements are called vertical mobility. But there are those individuals who want to go from a lower social class to a higher social class. These movements are called vertical mobility. Now, could it be that you and I are here this morning because we desire vertical mobility? We're here because we're not satisfied with this social class of where other people have secondary school certificates, and so do I, and therefore I desire vertical mobility to move into a higher social class where those individuals have bachelor's degrees. Failing to find satisfaction there, I go into a still higher social class. For there they have the master's degrees and on to PhDs and MDs. I find an ambitious aim for my life, the ultimate in social mobility, vertical mobility, in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 9. We make it our aim to please Him. To please Him, oh, the highest rung of social class. The class of God, to please Him. Someone asked St. Francis of Assisi one time, why is it that you have been able to accomplish so much good for God and for humanity? St. Francis replied, in genuine humility, said, one day God looked down upon this earth and said, I want to find the weakest, the littlest, the most insignificant man. And then God saw me. And God said, I know that He will not become proud when I work through Him. I know that He wants to please me. I know that He will do my will. And so God chose me. Oh, how wonderful it could be if each one will concentrate our energies upon this ambitious aim of life to please Him. In Romans chapter 14 and verse 18, we read these words, he who thus serves Christ is acceptable to God. Oh, it's one thing to be acceptable to those in our social class, or to be acceptable to those in a social class that is higher than we are at the present time. But the greatest aim that we can accomplish in our lives is that those lives should be acceptable to God. How do they become acceptable to God? Well, as the Bible writer says in verse 18, he who thus serves Christ. How do we serve Christ? Verse 17, he explains, not through food and drink only, but by righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. And this leads me to realize an ambitious aim for my conduct. That I aim that my conduct should be a righteous conduct, a peaceful conduct, and a joyful, happy conduct or disposition. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we find the second usage of this Greek word, which can be translated ambitions or aims. It's only used 3 times in the New Testament. There, Paul writes in verse 11, to aspire, to aim, to live quietly. Herein I see an important key to achieving my ambitious aim of my conduct, of righteous conduct, that of living quietly. Why, it seems in this 20th century that man has created a technological monster of Frankensteinian abilities who is out to destroy him. For we have experienced in our own lives the rush of the work, the 20th century that we're involved in, and how it can wear down on our physical well-being. It seems to me that the man of the 20th century has not been created by God to live as sometimes it seems that the 20th century demands man to live, but to aspire to live quietly. How often do we strive to discover God's will and righteousness for our lives and live accordingly and continue our life of rushing about? David heard God say in Psalm chapter 46, "Be still and know that I am God." Oh, what an ambitious aim for you and for me today for our righteous conduct, that to achieve that we learn to be still, that we aim to live quietly. And Paul goes on to say, to mind your own affairs. To mind your own affairs. Oh, this can cause a peaceable conduct within an individual to mind his own affairs. Could be that Paul here is saying, why don't you pay attention to the work that you're doing? I think if you'll ask any manager of individuals, he will tell you that the greatest thing that he desires are those people who, when hired for a job, will stick to that job, that they will accomplish the work that they have set out to do, to mind your own affairs. More than 100 years ago, on the campus of that prestigious Oxford University, there was a young boy who polished shoes of the students who came to and fro in that great university. As the days went by, the students began to talk among themselves, you know, a boy who can polish shoes that well must be able to learn well also, because they admired the way that he paid attention to the work that he was doing. And so they determined among themselves that every time they went to get their shoes polished from little George, that they would try to teach him something. As the days progressed, his teachers were amazed at the way that little George could learn. George continued to learn until he became a learned man and a humble man. He became one of the greatest religious orators to bring people to Christ in England, George Whitefield, because it was the ambitious aim of his conduct to mind his own affairs. But also, Paul may be trying to say here, to mind your own affairs, that is, don't go prying into other people's business. For what wonderful way to achieve the ambitious aim of my conduct, that of a peaceable conduct. For how much trouble has been stirred up in our world, because on an international scale, nations were not content to mind their own affairs, but instead they desired to meddle into the affairs of other nations, other peoples. It's the same way on the individual level, on the personal level. But you say, well, Pastor Green, here you're calling for that outdated mode of living, that of isolationism. Not at all, just encouraging nations and people to stay out of other people's business, to have respect for the beliefs, the ideologies of other people. I think of that example of that little nation tucked away in the heart of Europe. How Switzerland, of all nations of the world, seems to have most successfully carried out this idea of minding their own affairs. And yet, they did not ignore humanity, for that nation has a deep-felt concern for humanity and how much humanitarian good the little country of Switzerland has done for peoples, suffering peoples of the world. Could we determine, set as an ambitious aim for my conduct, that of minding my own affairs? Yes, being concerned about my fellow man, but refraining to pry into his affairs because I have respect for my neighbor. How may I have joyful conduct? A happy disposition? Oh, my aim is to work with your hands. You know, it seems like in many countries of the world there is a distaste for any type of manual labor. It seems to be beneath an important person to work with their hands. On the other hand, we find in many nations where there is again a hesitation to work with their hands. But instead they go on the welfare rolls, and it's their ambitious aim to stay on those welfare rolls as long as the government will funnel money to them. In other words, it appears to me today that in our 20th century the marvelous work ethic is on the wane, and too much socialism is coming in to make people lackadaisical and almost worthless, so to speak. But the ambitious aim for my life is to work with your hands, to do something. This is not just a call to go out, to throw away the books, and then indulge in digging ditches for the rest of our lives. Look at some of the developed nations. Why is it that it appears that there is a serious problem with insomnia among its inhabitants? The developed nation of America, while it takes on the average of only 7 minutes for a person to go to sleep once they get in bed, we find that more than 50% of adult Americans have chronic insomnia. In order to try to overcome this, they gulp down some 500 tons of sleeping pills annually. Jump across the Atlantic Ocean and go to Britain, and there we find the story is almost the same. 10% of all prescriptions in Britain are for sleeping pills. Why, in Britain, sleeping pills outsell even the common aspirin. But I find that if I will set my aim as the Apostle Paul did, an ambitious aim, to work with my own hands, that I will find a solution to that problem in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 12. Sweet is the sleep of a laborer. As I say, this is not a call for us to run out and pick up our shovels and become professional ditch diggers for the rest of our lives so that we can have a happy disposition, having slept well all night. This word that is translated laborer, we find comes from the root word which means to serve other people. Oh, sweet is a sleep. Happy is the disposition, joyful is the conduct of the one who serves other people. An Eastern ascetic came to a mystic, and he said he wanted to know the most great name, the 100th name of Allah. For it is felt that knowing the 100th name of Allah will give one the ability and the power to work miracles by which the courses of personal lives can be changed and history be changed. The good mystic looked at the ascetic and he said, traditionally there is a test that you must take. In the morning you go down to the gate of this city and you sit there all day and you see the one thing that impresses you the most, and in the evening you come and tell me what it was. And so the ascetic, the next day, he watched all day at the gate, and in the evening as he returned to the mystic asked him, what was it that you saw that impressed you the most? O honorable mystic, as I sat at the gate today, I noticed an old man bent over with a heavy load of wood upon his back as he came to the gate of this city. He wanted to sell this wood to have money for his family to eat another meal. Standing at the gate of the city was the guard of the gate, and he would not let the old man come into the city until he paid the tax on the value of that wood. The guard heard the old man plea for mercy. The old man said, just let me go into the city and sell my wood, so I may have some money, then I will pay you the tax that is required. The guard would have none of it. As he pulled the load of wood off of the back of the old man, stole it for himself, then realizing the man was penniless, friendless, and helpless, beat him and drove him away back into the countryside. And what was your impression? Asked the mystic. Oh, all the more I wanted to know the 100th name of Allah. Because had I known that name, that story of that man would have been different. O man who seeks for happiness, answered the Eastern mystic, I too wanted to know the 100th name of Allah at one time. And my master gave me a test so he could determine whether I was an impulsive emotionalist or a servant of mankind. For only a servant of mankind may know. Had you served that man instead of just wishing to know the 100th name of Allah, you would have learned Allah's 100th name. For that old man was the master. In Romans chapter 15 and verse 20, we find the third time this word is used in the Bible, which can be translated ambitions or aims. When Paul says in verse 20 of Romans 15, thus making it my ambition to preach the gospel. The Apostle Paul chose an ambitious aim for his life to witness to the gospel, to testify of the Jesus Christ whom he had come to know, whom he had had an experience with. What an ambitious aim for you and for me to choose. How many legal cases have been lost in law courts because there was no one who was able to testify to the veracity of the facts. Because there was no one to be able to witness to the truth of the circumstances. How many dangerous criminals have been turned loose into society to threaten and to molest that society once again? Because those who could have witnessed, those who had the ability, the experience to testify, they were afraid to witness and to testify. But it was not that way with Paul. For as his ambitious aim, he said, thus it is my ambition to preach the gospel. Oh, what an ambitious aim for you and me to choose for our work today, to preach the gospel It may be that you and I have no choice in the matter, but to witness for Christ wherever we go and however we may do it. In Revelation chapter 12, we read that story that gives us the synopsis of the conflict between good and evil from its inception. Through the battle in heaven when Satan was cast out onto this earth, and we hear those warning words from the angel, "Woe unto the earth, for the devil has come down among you." We hear the conflict of those souls as they struggle against Satan. Some are conquered and lost. Others conquer the devil. How do they conquer Satan? In verse 11, "And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." Oh, it was because they were willing to witness for him that they were able to conquer. Too often we point to the cross and we say, "There is my salvation completely," but dear friends, it isn't. For on the authority of God's Word, I propose that there are two aspects to conquering Satan. That is, through the cross and through our witness, our testimony of Jesus Christ, our words. This is not a call for everyone to throw all their different and varied majors overboard and become theology majors. No, in Romans chapter 15, where it said that it was Paul's ambition to preach the gospel, the word he uses there are two words actually in the Greek that can be translated as preach. One is for a professional preacher, professional speaker, orator. This isn't the word that he used. He used the word that is used in context of the ordinary Christian, of the lay member, who as he goes about, he preaches vocally, he speaks vocally to witness and to testify of Jesus Christ. It's a little more than just silently living one's life, though that is a part of it. As I think of Paul, that ambitious witness, as I see him as he meets that question, what for is all this effort? I see his determination that this effort is that he might live a life that is acceptable not just to those that are around him, not only possibly acceptable to those in the social class above him, but that he lives a life acceptable to God, the highest social class, the highest form of society. How can he live a life that is acceptable to God? Oh, he has set as his ambitious aim for his conduct that it should be a righteous conduct, engendered because he has aimed to live quietly. That it would be a peaceable conduct because he has learned a sense of responsibility for his work, because he has learned a sense of respect for his neighbor, for other people. That he has a joyful conduct because he is working to serve others. Oh, Paul realized being a witness for God. It's that determination, because he concentrated his aims, his energies behind those aims, that Paul was able to go up and down the length of Palestine, through Asia Minor, across Macedonia, and into Greece. What were the results? What for was all this effort? He could tell us today all that effort was put forth to achieve those ambitious aims of his life, his conduct, and his work. It was all those efforts were for satisfaction. I hear the satisfaction that Paul experienced as sitting there in that dark dungeon in Rome. He says, "For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. For I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but to all those who love his appearing. Ambitious aims, my ambitious aims, that I may achieve, that I may understand true satisfaction and lasting happiness.